The sun hadn't even burned the chill off the morning air when the first neighbor stepped outside and froze. There, in the middle of a quiet cul-de-sac where nothing louder than a lawnmower usually happened, a silver Mercedes sat on the asphalt like a gutted animal. Its hood removed, wheels gone, engine stripped into clean, organized clusters of metal glinting in the light. Not smashed. Not vandalized. Disassembled. Piece by piece. Bolt by bolt. Laid out with the care of a surgeon preparing instruments. Police cruisers flanked the scene, red and blue lights rippling against garage doors and trimmed hedges. Officers stood in a semicircle, hands on hips, radios crackling as they tried to make sense of what they were looking at. It wasn't destruction. It was precision. It was intentional. And it was completely, unnervingly legal. Phones were already out. Neighbors whispered in tight clusters, snapping photos, filming videos, trying to capture the site before the HOA found a way to bury the evidence. Someone gasped as they noticed her, the HOA president, storming down the sidewalk in her robe and slippers, face red, hair wild, voice trembling with indignation. She pointed at the mechanic like he was a criminal caught in the act, but the only thing he held was a shop rag streaked with grease and morning dew. And he didn't say a word. The 62-year-old widower stood over the skeletal remains of the Mercedes with a stillness that unsettled everyone watching. No triumph. No anger. Just calm. A quiet, almost sacred focus. There was something eerie about how serene he looked amidst all the chaos. The shouting, the police radios, the HOA screams, the neighbors murmuring behind their hands. He seemed separate from all of it, like a man who had made his peace long before this moment arrived. The HOA president kept insisting she'd been wronged, that her property had been destroyed, that the man should be arrested on the spot. But each time an officer examined the scene, checked the position of the car, measured its distance from the curb, or read from the codebook they pulled from their cruiser, the truth became harder and harder for her to swallow. He hadn't broken a single law. Not one. Still, the question hung in the air like static. How does a quiet, retired mechanic wake up one morning and calmly dismantle a $90,000 luxury vehicle in front of half the neighborhood? The answer didn't start here. It started every morning for weeks, each sunrise blocked by the same Mercedes parked directly in front of his home, the same spot he used to sit with his late wife, the same strip of curb where sunlight once warmed the garden she planted before cancer took her. The garden that still bloomed because he tended it every day, speaking to the flowers the way some people pray. Then came the mornings when the HOA president pulled up earlier and earlier, cutting him off from that small moment of peace. Parking there not out of necessity, not out of accident, but out of entitlement. Out of spite. Out of the smug confidence of someone who believed rules existed to control others, never herself. Neighbors warned her. She ignored them. He approached her gently. She laughed. Police told her the spot wasn't hers. She parked there anyway. She didn't know the one thing she should have. He wasn't just an old man with a wrench set. He was a mechanic who had spent 4 decades knowing machines the way artists know their paint. He could dismantle a car blindfolded if he had to. And more importantly, he understood the law better than she did. So now the morning light danced across a mechanical skeleton while she screamed and officers took notes. The neighbors captured everything on their phones. And the widower simply watched, breathing in the crisp air, his gaze drifting briefly toward the quiet space beside the driveway, the little garden where his wife's roses once swayed freely in the sun. A car had blocked that view. A person had disrespected that memory. Today both were gone. And yet one question lingered, pulsing at the center of the chaos. What finally pushed this peaceful man to deliver such a precise, devastating response? And why was the HOA president so desperate to hide the truth behind it? Before the sirens, before the crowd, before the Mercedes lay in pieces on the asphalt like a high-end autopsy, life on Everpine Court moved at a gentler rhythm. Slow, predictable, almost tender in its quiet routines. And for a long time, that rhythm was enough for a 62-year-old retired mechanic who had spent most of his life fixing engines and building a home that meant more to him than any machine he had ever restored. He had bought the house nearly 3 decades ago with his wife, a warm-hearted woman who believed that a home wasn't built with wood and stone but with care, patience, and purpose. Together they shaped the place room by room, hand-painted shutters, a small garden along the driveway where she planted roses every spring, and a tiny stone corner fountain she found at a flea market and insisted on restoring. When she passed, the house didn't feel empty, it felt sacred. Every board, every brick, every blooming rose carried fingerprints of the life they shared. He never moved. Never wanted to. He kept the house exactly the way she left it. Not out of stubbornness, but out of reverence. The driveway she insisted they pave with stone instead of concrete. He scrubbed it every month. The flower beds along the walkway, he trimmed them with the precision of a jeweler. Even the old mailbox she'd painted sky blue stayed untouched, protected from HOA modernization initiatives by his steady refusal to replace it. People said it was overkill, but to him, the house wasn't property. It was memory. It was devotion. It was the one place he still felt her presence. The neighborhood itself had once matched that same gentle spirit. When he first arrived, Everpine Court was full of older families, young couples, and longtime residents who simply wanted clean lawns, quiet evenings, and friendly waves during morning walks. The HOA existed, but only in the background. Reminders about trash pickup, the occasional holiday potluck, nothing more. But with time, things shifted. New faces replaced old ones. Expectations replaced neighborliness. And eventually, the HOA evolved into something far more aggressive than the community he once knew. It happened slowly at first. A new rule here, a surprise fee there, a decor standards update no one had asked for. But the real shift came the day the community elected a woman who treated the position of HOA president like a coronation ceremony. She moved into the largest house on the block a year earlier, a sharp-tongued, designer-clad woman whose luxury cars were louder than her smile. And the moment she took office, Everpine Court changed. She called herself organized. Neighbors quietly called her something else. What made her powerful wasn't intelligence, it was persistence. She took pictures of trash cans placed out a few minutes early. She wrote formal warnings for lawn patches that dared to brown in the summer heat. If a child rode a bike too close to a decorative garden, she sent an email with citations. She wasn't running an HOA, she was running a miniature kingdom where she alone decided how a proper neighborhood should look. The mechanic tried to ignore her. He stayed polite, quiet, focused on his routine. He had no interest in battles over grass length or mailbox regulations. But he noticed things, small things, like the way she stared at him during community events, her posture stiff, her arms folded tight. That silent assessment, that subtle glare, that almost imperceptible hint of condescension that often falls on older men, widowers, or anyone she believed wasn't up to her standard. Some neighbors whispered it was more than that she only targeted certain households, certain families, certain people who didn't fit her image of Everpine Court. A few even said there were patterns in the fines she handed out and the warnings she issued. Patterns that weren't random. He'd lived long enough to see these things for what they were. But he stayed out of it. Or tried to. Until her Mercedes showed up. On a cool morning in late spring, he stepped outside with his coffee and found the luxury car parked directly in front of his home. Not in her driveway. Not in her designated parking space. But in front of his curb, angled just enough that the sun failed to reach the small garden his wife once cherished. The roses that thrived in that specific patch of morning light suddenly sat in shadow. At first, he assumed it was coincidence. A contractor at her house. A package delivery. Maybe she'd needed an easier place to park for a moment. He wasn't confrontational. He didn't believe in escalating things that could be solved by simple communication. But the next morning, the Mercedes was there again. And the next. And the next. Every day, same car. Same spot. Same shadow cast over his garden. He approached her once, calm, polite, almost apologetic, asking if she could move it a few feet back so it wouldn't obstruct the driveway or the sun hitting the roses. She dismissed him with a tight smile and a wave of her hand. "It's legal," she said, as if legality was the only measure of respect. And then she began parking even closer. Inches from his driveway. Sometimes centimeters. Enough to make backing out a delicate dance of mirrors and patience. Neighbors noticed. They whispered. Some shook their heads but said nothing. A few offered sympathetic looks but avoided involvement. No one wanted to draw the attention of an HOA president who had already fined half the street for rules most couldn't even find in the bylaws. To him, the Mercedes wasn't just a car. It was an intrusion. A trespass. A white-gloved finger dragging across the last place, he still felt a connection to his wife. It blocked his view from the porch where they once sat drinking coffee together. It cast shade across the flowers she planted with her own hands. It stood like a smug, metallic reminder of someone who believed she could do whatever she wanted simply because she held a title and drove a luxury vehicle. At first, he tolerated it. Then he adjusted. Then he tried ignoring it. But gradually, morning by morning, the intrusion evolved into something unmistakably deliberate. She wasn't parking there out of necessity. She was parking there out of entitlement. She wanted to be seen. She wanted to be acknowledged. She wanted to send a message. She controlled the neighborhood. She controlled the rules. And she controlled him. One morning, as he stepped outside and saw the Mercedes waiting in its now familiar position, the realization settled in the cold air around him like dust. She wasn't just inconsiderate. She was doing it on purpose. She believed he was the easiest person on the street to push around. And she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The morning air was unusually still, almost holding its breath. The sun had barely crested the horizon, scattering gold across the quiet suburban street. And there it was, her Mercedes, gleaming arrogantly in the first light, parked precisely where it had become a daily torment. She leaned casually against the driver's side, sunglasses tilted just so, clipboard clutched like a ceremonial scepter. Her smirk was sharper than the chrome trim reflecting the morning sun. Neighbors peered from behind hedges, coffee cups frozen mid-sip, as if knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. He stepped out of his house, his gait deliberate, unhurried, carrying nothing but a small toolbox in one hand and a calm, unreadable expression. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't even glance at her. This wasn't about rage. This was about precision, discipline, and the long shadow of every morning she had ruined with her arrogance. Every day she had parked her car like a symbol of dominance, but today, the symbol would become something else entirely. The first neighbors who had dared approach whispered, eyes wide, as he knelt beside the front tire. The quiet clicking of his gloves and the metallic sheen of wrenches catching sunlight sounded almost ceremonial. He set each tool down methodically, measuring angles, assessing bolts. The Mercedes had been her armor, her declaration of superiority, and now it was about to be stripped of all pretense, piece by piece. She laughed softly at first, thinking it a harmless curiosity. "What are you doing, old man?" she called, voice sharp but edged with that condescending amusement. He didn't answer. Not a word. A single nod toward the first lug nut said everything he needed to communicate. The first tire came off. Neighbors leaned closer, some gasping. Metal scraped lightly against the curb as he set it aside, spinning slowly to rest on its side, rims immaculate, tires stacked in order. The Mercedes looked smaller already, more vulnerable, its arrogance beginning to crumble. Every bolt, every screw, removed with care, catalogued, and placed precisely where it belonged. Nothing destroyed. Nothing damaged. Only disassembled, a mechanical skeleton exposed under the early sun. The air filled with the symphony of tools, the rhythmic clinking of sockets, the soft ratcheting of wrenches, the hollow echo of metal pieces being lifted. Each sound punctuated the tense quiet, drawing the attention of even the most hesitant neighbors. Children peeked over fences, phones in hand. A few older residents watched with a mix of disbelief and admiration. They had seen her bullies dominate from the shadows for years, but this was different. And then she realized. The smirk faltered. Her laughter turned to sputtering incredulity as she finally understood that nothing he was doing broke any law. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't damaging property. The Mercedes rested on public land. His hands moved with the skill of decades spent restoring engines, restoring life to rusted steel. The next hour became a mechanical ballet. The hood was lifted, and with meticulous care, parts were catalogued and arranged along the curb. Mirrors, windshields, brake components, interior panels, all removed with surgical precision. The car transformed under his hands, from a symbol of ostentation into a neatly organized pile of parts. She screamed, first at the neighbors, then directly at him. Her voice cracked with panic, the kind of panic reserved for those who suddenly realize that control is slipping through their fingers. "Stop. This is my car. You can't do this. Police." Her heels clicked against the pavement as she flailed toward him, clipboard flying like a weapon. But he remained calm, methodical, almost eerie in his composure. Within minutes, police cruisers arrived, lights flashing, sirens slicing the quiet morning. Officers jumped from their vehicles, anticipating confrontation, chaos, perhaps even assault. But the moment they assessed the scene, confusion replaced anticipation. He had every part laid out in neat rows, every movement legal. He showed them the city ordinance, public land statutes, the same rules she had been bending for months to assert dominance. The officers' expressions softened as they stepped back. "He hasn't broken any law," one said, disbelief clear in his voice. "All of this is technically allowed." Her meltdown escalated in real time. She stomped her heels, waving her arms, voice rising until it was almost shrill. "I am the HOA president. I demand, this is harassment. Stop. You can't." She turned to neighbors, pleading for validation. They stared silently, mouths agape. No one intervened. No one defended her. By mid-morning, the Mercedes was reduced to a precise skeletal frame. Every panel, every mirror, every wheel accounted for. The car that had blocked sunlight, shadowed his late wife's garden, and reminded him of months of harassment was now powerless, exposed, meticulously documented. The street held its collective breath. Finally, he removed the last bolt holding the hood in place. He stepped back, wiped his hands on a rag, and surveyed his work. The Mercedes was unrecognizable, organized chaos, a testament to discipline over arrogance, patience over entitlement. She collapsed onto the sidewalk, clutching her head, staring at the skeletal frame of her once proud symbol. The neighbors whispered. Phones clicked. The officers confirmed once more, firmly, he had violated no laws. Every motion, every decision, entirely legal. She had crossed a line of pride, not legality, and in that space he had outmaneuvered her completely. And as the final bolt left the Mercedes chassis, the street fell into an almost sacred silence. The car gleamed like a dissected trophy under the sunlight, stripped bare not by anger, but by mastery. The HOA president, once untouchable, once smug, was reduced to stunned, bitter humiliation. It was the moment where everything changed. Not just for her, not just for him, but for the neighborhood watching in disbelief. The scales of power had shifted, and the quiet mechanic had proven, with nothing but skill, patience, and precision, that rules could be bent, but integrity and ingenuity could bend back harder. The last bolt clicked into place in his hand, and he straightened. A faint smile touched his lips, not of cruelty, but of calm resolution. Today, the Mercedes had taught a lesson far beyond what words could convey. And she had no idea how far he could take it next. The street that had once trembled under her arrogance now held in almost reverent silence. The Mercedes, dismantled and meticulously organized, sat in neat rows along the curb, each panel, every wheel, every mirror, every interior piece boxed or labeled with surgical precision. He stood beside it, calm and composed, hands resting lightly on his hips, surveying the work with a quiet satisfaction that radiated far more power than any shouting match ever could. The neighbors lingered on their porches and behind hedges, watching the quiet reckoning unfold. Even the early morning sun seemed to pause, casting long golden shadows across the scene, illuminating the mechanical skeleton of entitlement stripped bare. Karen, the self-appointed queen of Oak Ridge Estates, stood frozen, the clipboard clutched limply in her hands. Her once commanding posture had crumpled into disbelief. She had faced fines, warnings, and complaints before, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her Mercedes, the gleaming statement of wealth and dominance that had mocked his mornings, blocked his driveway, and overshadowed the garden he and his late wife had nurtured together, was reduced to an orderly assembly of parts. Each piece was a silent accusation, a demonstration that skill, patience, and lawfulness could topple arrogance. He moved with deliberate calm. Methodically, he began handing Karen the boxes, each containing a part of her former dominion. Tires first, stacked carefully and labeled. Then the mirrors, headlights, and dashboard components, each wrapped and handled with care. The neighbors whispered among themselves, astonished not only by his technical mastery but by the restraint and civility he maintained. There was no malice here, no desire for destruction, only the quiet assertion of justice, of boundaries, and of dignity. For the first time, Karen's voice broke. This isn't fair. You can't just. She stopped mid-sentence as the officers who had arrived during the climax watched, nodding slightly. Their stance was clear. He had broken no law. Every movement, every decision, had been fully within his rights. Her authority, once unchallenged, crumbled in that instant. Around the neighborhood, something remarkable began to shift. The aura of fear she had cultivated over months began to dissipate. Neighbors who had cowered behind closed doors and whispered in secret about unfair fines and petty harassment now stepped forward, emboldened by what they had witnessed. Some quietly expressed admiration for the mechanic, a few even offered helping hands, and a sense of communal pride blossomed in the shared acknowledgement of injustice finally being confronted. The silence that had once been oppressive was replaced by murmurs of relief, cautious laughter, and the soft buzz of liberated conversations. The HOA board, once a fortress of unchecked authority, felt the tremors of resistance. Complaints that had long been ignored now gained traction. Letters were drafted, petitions circulated, and the veneer of Karen's invincibility began to crack. Her influence waned as neighbors realized that her power had been rooted not in law, but in intimidation and fear. No longer could she dictate compliance with threats of fines, vague rules, or procedural loopholes. The neighborhood's collective voice, once muffled, had grown loud, steady, and unafraid. Amid this upheaval, he returned to the small sanctuary of his late wife's garden. The roses she had planted, the bird bath she had discovered at a flea market, the stone pavers they had laid together, all remained untouched. The morning sunlight now bathed the yard unobstructed, spilling warmth across the flowers, the lawn, and the driveway he had maintained with devotion. A gentle breeze carried the scent of roses and freshly cut grass, mixing with the faint metallic tang lingering from the dismantled Mercedes. In that quiet moment, he felt a profound sense of peace. The battle had been about more than a car. It had been about respect, memory, and the unshakable dignity of claiming one's own space. The emotional payoff extended beyond personal closure. The street had witnessed a transformation, the faint tension of HOA oppression replaced by cautious optimism, and the quiet mechanic became a symbol of resilience. Children played again in yards that had felt surveilled. Retired neighbors emerged from behind curtains to enjoy their porches without fear of scrutiny. A subtle but powerful change in the social fabric had taken root, the knowledge that entitlement could be challenged, that rules could be questioned, and that courage did not always have to roar to be heard. For Karen, the fallout was immediate. Her smugness dissolved into humiliation, her attempts to assert dominance thwarted at every turn. Calls to the HOA board yielded little support. Residents who had once feared her influence now challenged her every decision, asking pointed questions, citing precedents, and quietly undermining her authority. The empire she had built on intimidation and selective enforcement fractured, exposing the fragility beneath her polished exterior. He did not gloat. There were no celebrations, no dramatic speeches. What he had achieved was not vengeance, it was restoration. Restoration of order, dignity, and the sanctity of a home built with love. The dismantled Mercedes, carefully returned in pieces, served as a quiet testament to skill over ego, patience over impulsivity, and lawfulness over unchecked power. And yet, the story lingered beyond his own victory. The lesson rippled through the neighborhood, a stark reminder that power unearned can be challenged, that communities can resist quietly, and that dignity is a force more enduring than wealth or title. It was a story of small victories stacking into a profound triumph, a narrative of resilience that required no shouting to be heard. He stood once more in the yard, watching sunlight shimmer over the stone pavers, roses, and bird bath. He allowed himself a slow exhale, the weight of months of tension dissolving into the soft morning air. The Mercedes, once a symbol of dominance, was now nothing more than neatly boxed parts, a puzzle for its owner to reassemble, but perhaps with a lesson that would linger far longer than the value of the car itself. In the end, he understood something elemental. Standing up for yourself, even quietly, even methodically, can change everything. Respect isn't demanded with loud words or threats. It is earned, preserved, and protected with clarity, patience, and unwavering adherence to truth. He had not just defended a driveway, a garden, or a memory. He had defended dignity itself. And as the neighborhood slowly returned to its rhythm, he asked himself, and perhaps you, watching this story, one final question. How many times have we allowed fear, intimidation, or entitlement to dictate our lives, and what might we achieve if we faced it with the same calm courage? The morning sun shone without obstruction. The roses bloomed. The driveway, once a battleground, was a place of peace again. And somewhere in the quiet, a neighborhood learned that injustice can be met not with fury, but with unshakable resolve, and that the smallest, quietest acts of resistance can echo far louder than anyone imagines.